Juliet, and this is the famous balcony scene. So Romeo has already ditched his friends, and his friends have left him because they tried to get him to come out, he wouldn't. And so he feels like he needs to talk to Juliet some more. And so he says he jests at scars that never felt a wound. So this is after his friends are gone, which is basically saying that his friends are, specifically Mercutio, he's making fun of him or jesting about him because he's never felt the scars of love. So he's never been in love before and been wounded by it. So at this point, Juliet appears at the window above, and so he can see her, but she doesn't know that he's down there. And he says, "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who is already sick and pale with grief. But thou, her maid, art far more fair than she. Be not her maid, since she is envious. Her vestal livery is but sick and green, and none but fools do wear it. Cast it off. It is my lady, oh, it is my love. Oh, that she knew she were. She speaks, yet she says nothing. What of that? Her eye discourses. I will answer it. I am too bold. 'Tis not to me she speaks. Two of the fairest stars in all the heaven, having some business, do entreat her eyes to twinkle in their spheres till they return. What if her eyes were there, they in her head? The brightness of her cheek would shame those stars, as daylight doth a lamp. Her eye in heaven would through the airy regions stream so bright, that birds would sing, and think it were not night. See how she leans her cheek upon her hand. Oh, that I were a glove upon that hand, that I might touch that cheek." So he always compares her to something that's like really bright and beautiful. So he sees her in the window, and he says that Juliet is the sun. And so he says it is the east and Juliet is the sun. So the sun rises in the east. And he says that she will kill the envious moon with her beauty and her brightness, because the moon is already jealous of her and it's sick and pale with grief, and because she's more beautiful than the moon. So then he starts talking about Juliet, and he's already calling her his love, his lady, and so he already thinks that of her as the love of his life, basically. And he says, oh, that she knew she were. So he wishes he could tell her how he felt. And then so he talks about her eyes and how they look like they're full of stars, and he talks about how her cheek is so bright that it would shame the stars in the sky, as daylight shames a lamp, because it's even brighter. And so he says that the birds would start singing because they would get confused and think that it was day and not night. So this whole thing is like a metaphor kind of explaining how Juliet is the sun. So she's bright like the sun. And so he says he wishes that he were a glove just so he could touch her cheek, just to be near her. So then Juliet speaks, and she says, I, me. But again, she doesn't know he's down there. And Romeo says, she speaks, oh, speak again, bright angel, for thou art as glorious as this night, being o'er my head, as is a winged messenger of heaven unto the white upturned wondering eyes of mortals that fall back to gaze on him, when he bestrides the lazy puffing clouds and sails upon the bosom of the air. So he wants her to speak again. So he wants to hear what she has to say. And Juliet, she says this really famous line, and she says, O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Deny thy father and refuse thy name, or if that will not, be but sworn my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet. And Romeo says, shall I hear more, or shall I speak at this? So Juliet, when she says that line, O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Wherefore, nowadays, it means, we would think she would say like, where are you Romeo? But she's actually saying, why are you Romeo? So wherefore back in Shakespeare's time meant why. And so she's saying, why are you Romeo? Why do you have to be a Montague? Why do you have to be my enemy? So she says, deny thy father and refuse thy name. So she actually is talking about wanting him to leave his family and for her. And then she says, but if you won't leave your family, then I'll no longer be a Capulet. So she says that she'll actually disown her family if he decides that he doesn't want to do that. And so then Romeo, he's standing down there and he's kind of thinking, okay, do I say something or do I sit and listen to what else she has to say? So he decides to listen. So she starts to talk more. And she says, "'Tis but thy name that is thy enemy. Thou art thyself, though not a Montague. What's Montague? It is nor hand nor foot, nor arm nor face, nor any other part belonging to a man. Oh, be some other name. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet. So Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, retain that dear perfection which he owes without that title. Romeo, doff thy name, and for that name, which is no part of thee, take all myself." And Romeo answers, "I take thee at thy word." So Juliet, she says that it's Romeo's name that's the enemy, it's not him. And so she says, well, what is even a Montague? She says it's not like a hand or a foot, an arm or a face. It's nothing that if you would cut it off that you would really miss it. And so she says this is another famous line she says, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet." So she's saying that names really don't matter. So if you would call a rose, let's say like a daffodil, it's not going to start smelling like a daffodil. It's going to smell like a rose. And so she's saying, even if you called a rose a hamburger, it's not going to magically start smelling like a hamburger. It's still going to smell a rose. So she's saying even if you call Romeo another name, he's still going to be perfection in her eyes. So it doesn't matter what his last name is. So then she says, "Romeo, doff thy name," which means to throw off your name, and then he can have all of her. And so then Romeo takes this opportunity to step out of hiding, and he says, "Well, I take you at your word." So he's saying, if this is how you feel, then I won't be Romeo anymore. And he says, "Call me but love, and I'll be new baptized. Henceforth I never will be Romeo." And Juliet answers, "What man art thou thus bescreened tonight, so stumblest on my counsel?" And Romeo says, "By a name I know not how to tell thee who I am. My name, dear saint, is hateful to myself, because it is an enemy to thee. Had I it written, I would tear the word." Juliet says, "But my ears have not yet drunk 100 words of that tongue's uttering. Yet I know the sound. Art thou not Romeo and a Montague?" "Neither, fair maid, if either thee dislike." And Juliet answers, "How camest thou hither? Tell me, and wherefore? The orchard walls are high and hard to climb, and the place death, considering who thou art, if any of my kinsmen find thee here." So when Romeo, he says, I'll never be Romeo again, Juliet, she's kind of frightened at first because she didn't know anyone was down there. And she says, "Well, who are you who's been listening to my counsel or what I have to say?" And Romeo says, "I don't even know how to tell you who I am, because that name is hateful to me." And he says, "If I had it written down on a piece of paper, I would tear it in pieces because I hate my last name so much." And then Juliet, she says, "Well, I haven't even heard you say 100 words, but I know the sound of your voice." She says, "Aren't you Romeo and a Montague?" And he says, "I won't be either if you don't want me to be." And then Juliet, she starts questioning him. She says, "Well, how did you get here?" She said, "The orchard walls are high and they're hard to climb." And she says that you will suffer death if any of my kinsmen or my family find you here. And Romeo answers and he says, "With love's light wings did I o'erperch these walls, for stony limits cannot hold love out. And what love can do, that dares love attempt, therefore thy kinsmen are no stop to me. If they do see thee, they will murder thee. Alack, there lies more peril in thine eye than 20 of their swords. Look thou but sweet, and I am proof against their enmity. I would not for the world they saw thee here. I have night's cloak to hide me from their eyes. And but thou love me, let them find me here. My life were better ended by their hate than death prorogued, wanting of thy love. By whose direction foundst out this place? By love, that first did prompt me to inquire. He lent me counsel, and I lent him eyes. I am no pilot, yet wert thou as far as the vast shore washed with the farthest sea, I would adventure for such merchandise. So at this point, Juliet's kind of like, how did you get here? And so Romeo answers, well, love's light wings. It helped me get over the walls. He says, nothing can hold me out. Stone limits cannot hold me out. And he says, your kinsmen are no stop to me. And Juliet, she says, well, if they see you here, they are going to murder you. And then Romeo says that he is more fearful of the look in Juliet's eyes than 20 of their swords. So he says that he's more worried that she's going to say she doesn't love him than getting killed. So Juliet says, well, I don't want them to find you here. And Romeo says, well, I have night's cloak, so he has darkness to hide him from their eyes. And he says that he were better his life ended by their hate than for Juliet to not love him back. And she says, well, who gave you directions here? How did you find where I was? And Romeo says, well, love. He says, even if you were on the farthest shore in the farthest sea, he says, I would do anything to get to you, and I would be able to find you. So then Juliet, she says, thou knowest the mask of night is on my face, else would a maiden blush bepaint my cheek. For that which thou hast heard me speak tonight, fain would I dwell in form, fain deny what I have spoke. But farewell compliment, dost thou love me? I note thou wilt say aye, and I will take thy word. Yet if thou swearest, thou mayest prove false. At lovers' perjuries, they say, Jove laughs. O gentle Romeo, if thou dost love, pronounce it faithfully. Or, if thou thinkest I am too quickly won, I'll frown and be perverse and say thee nay. So that wilt woo, but else not for the world. In truth, fair Montague, I am too fond, and therefore thou mayest think my behavior light. But trust me, gentlemen, I'll prove more true than those that have more coin to be strange. I should have been more strange, I must confess, but that thou overheardest ere I was ware, my true love's passion. Therefore pardon me, and not impute this yielding to light love, which the dark night has so discovered. So Juliet, she's talking about how she's kind of embarrassed. So she says a maiden blush bepaints her cheek. So she's blushing, and because of everything she said. So she's basically said, all these things that she wasn't ready for Romeo to hear. And so then she says that, she asks him, she says, do you love me? And then she says, no, I know you'll say yes, and I'll take you at your word. She says, but don't lie to me. And she says, I know that I don't want you to think that I'm too quickly won. So she doesn't want him to think that she's been, she just says, I love you to every other guy, that this is real for her. And so she says, maybe I am too fond of you. But she says, I don't want you to think my behavior is light. So that she's going to fall in love with him tonight and then fall in love with somebody else the next day. And she says that she'll be more true than girls that have played hard to get. And so she wants him to know that. Then she says, pardon her for saying all these things, for being so forward and so bold, but he's the one that was listening into her private thoughts, and she didn't know he was there when she was saying all these things. So then Romeo, he says, lady, by yonder blessed moon I vow, that tips with silver all these fruit treetops. And Juliet, she interrupts him, and she says, oh, swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon, that monthly changes in her circle orb, lest that thy love prove likewise variable. What shall I swear by? Do not swear at all. Or, if thou wilt, swear by thy gracious self, which is the God of my idolatry, and I'll believe thee. If my heart's dear love, well, do not swear. Although I joy in thee, I have no joy of this contract tonight. It is too rash, too unadvised, too sudden, too like the lightning, which doth cease to be ere one can say it lightens. Sweet good night. This bud of love by summer's ripening breath may prove a beauteous flower when next we meet. Good night, as sweet repose and rest come to thy heart as that within my breast. So Romeo, he starts to swear his love by the moon. Now, if you think about it, the moon is always changing. So you have like a full moon and a quarter moon. And so she stops him. She says, don't swear by the moon. The moon is inconstant. The moon is always changing. And so she says, does that mean your love is going to be the same? And then Romeo says, well, what do you want me to swear by? And Juliet says, well, you don't have to swear your love at all. But if I'll believe you if you say that you love me. And so he starts to swear his love again, and she stops him. She says, no, don't swear your love at all. She says, I think this is all happening too fast. So they haven't even known each other more than a few hours. And so she says that this is like the lightning, that when it brightens up the sky and it's so intense, and then all of a sudden it's gone. So she doesn't want their love to be the same. And so then she says she wants their love to be like a flower that's barely blooming. And then she says, if we leave tonight and say goodnight to one another, when we see each other again, it's going to be in full bloom. And so she says, go home, go to sleep, and we'll see each other tomorrow. And then Romeo answers, he says, oh, will you leave me so unsatisfied? And Juliet says, what satisfaction canst thou have tonight? And Romeo says, the exchange of thy love's faithful vow for mine. And Juliet says, I gave thee mine before thou didst request it, and yet I would it to give again. And so Romeo's not ready to leave her yet. And Juliet says, well, what else could you want? And Romeo says, well, I want you to promise that you love me. Tell me that you love me. And Juliet says, well, I already told you that when you were listening into my private thoughts. She says, but I wish I could take it back again. And Romeo says, wouldst thou withdraw it? For what purpose, love? Meaning, why would you take it back? And Juliet says, but to be frank and give it to thee again. And yet I wish but for the thing I have. My bounty is as boundless as the sea, as my love is deep. The more I give to thee, the more I have, for both are infinite. And the nurse calls inside. I hear some noise within. Dear love, adieu. Anon, good nurse, sweet Montague, be true. Stay but a little, I will come again. So Juliet, she says that her love is like the ocean, so like the tide. So she says the more, if she could take back that she loved him, then she can give him more in return, because her love for him is infinite. So it's never ending, it's limitless. And so then the nurse calls for her, so she says, wait out here a minute, I'll be back. So Romeo, he says, oh, blessed, blessed moon, I am afeard. Being in night, all this is but a dream, too flattering sweet to be substantial. So he's worried that all this is just a dream. It's too good to be true. So Juliet comes back, and so she just spoken to the nurse, and she says, 3 words, dear Romeo, and good night indeed. If that thy bent of love be honorable, thy purpose marriage, send me word tomorrow by one that I'll procure to come to thee, where and what time thou wilt perform the rite, and all my fortunes at thy foot I'll lay, and follow thee, my lord, throughout the world. So at this point, this is kind of shocking. Juliet, she says, if your purpose is marriage. So she actually just proposed to him. And so she says, good night. She says, but I'll send someone, I'll procure somebody, I'll get somebody to go see you tomorrow, and we will decide where and what time we're going to get married. She says, then I'll put all my fortunes at your feet, and I'll follow you throughout the world. And so she's definitely, even though she's the one that just said, this is all going too fast, it's like lightning, she has decided that she wants to marry him now, and that if he's on board, that they'll decide when and what time they're going to do this, or when and where they're going to do this. So the nurse yells, Madam, from inside, and Juliet says, I come anon, but if thou meanest not well, I do beseech thee. And the nurse yells again, Madam. And Juliet says, by and by I come, to cease thy strife and leave me for my grief. Tomorrow will I send. Romeo answers, so thrive my soul. And then Juliet answers 1,000 times good night. And so the nurse is yelling for Juliet inside. And so then she says, well, tomorrow, so he likes this idea. And she says that she'll send somebody to find out tomorrow. So now Juliet leaves, and Romeo says, 1,000 times the worse to want thy light. Love goes toward love as schoolboys from their books, but love from love toward school with heavy looks. So so once Juliet has gone, then Romeo, he says he already misses her. He wants her light, because remember, he compares her to the sun. And so he says that love, when you leave somebody, when you leave somebody that you love, it's like going to school. So with heavy looks. And when you go towards somebody that you love, it's like schoolboys leaving school. So leaving their books behind. All right. So now Juliet runs back, and she says, hist, Romeo, hist, oh, for a falconer's voice, to lure this tassel gentle back again. Bondage is hoarse, and may not speak aloud, else would I tear the cave where echo lies, and make her airy tongue more hoarse than mine. with repetition of my Romeo. So she wishes that that she was a falconer, which is somebody who owns a falcon and they can call them back to them whenever they want to. And so she can call Romeo back to her. And she says that that she wishes that she could just repeat his name all the time, just like Echo did. I don't know if you know the myth of Echo and Narcissus, where when she dies, she becomes an echo, and from Greek mythology, and because she falls in love with a man named Narcissus, and that's how we get the echo. So she repeats his name over and over again and basically wastes away in a cave because she was in love with him. All right, so she yells out Romeo, and Romeo hears her. So he comes back and he says, "It is my soul that calls upon my name. How sweet silver sound lovers' tongues by night, like softest music to attending ears." And then Juliet, she says, "Romeo." And then he answers her and he says, "My niece," which is like the baby hawk. And so then Juliet says, "What o'clock tomorrow shall I send thee?" And Romeo says, "By the hour of 9. Juliet says, "I will not fail. 'Tis 20 year till then. I have forgot why I did call thee back." Romeo says, "Let me stand here till thou remember it." So this is kind of like they don't want to leave each other. So Juliet's going to send someone to go talk to Romeo at 9 o'clock in the morning and see if when and where they're going to get married. And so Juliet says, "It feels like it's 20 years from now." And she says, "I don't even remember why I called you back here." And Romeo says, "Well, I'll stand here until you do remember." So he's not willing to leave yet. He doesn't want to leave. And Juliet says, "I shall forget to have thee still stand there, remembering how I love thy company. And I'll still stay. To have thee still forgetting any other home but this." And Juliet says, "'Tis almost morning. I would have thee gone, and yet no further than a wanton's bird, that lets it hop a little from his hand, like a poor prisoner in his twisted gyves, and with a silken thread plucks it back again, so loving jealous of his liberty." And Romeo says, I would I were thy bird." So Romeo, he says, "Well, I'll stay here and I'll forget any other home other than this because you don't want me to leave." And Juliet says, "Well, it's almost morning. You have to go." And she says, "I wish that you were a little bird that has a thread around its foot, and then whenever I wanted you, I could pull you back anytime." And so she doesn't want him to be free from her. And then Romeo, he answers, he says, "Why, I wish I were your bird." And then Juliet, she says, "Sweet, so would I, yet I should kill thee with much cherishing. Good night, parting is such sweet sorrow, that I shall say good night till it be morrow." So she's saying like it's basically like she loves him and she's glad, she wants to see him tomorrow so they can get married, but she also doesn't want him to leave, so she feels sorry that he's going to leave. Okay, she also says that she would probably kill him with too much love if he were her little bird, which is kind of a weird thing to say. Okay, so then Romeo, he says, "Sleep, dwell upon thine eyes, sleep in thy breast. Would I were sleep in peace, so sweet to rest. Hence will I go to my ghostly friar's close cell, his help to crave, and my dear hap to tell." So Romeo, he leaves Juliet's, and so he says, he wishes her goodnight, and he says, well, he can't go home yet because he has to talk to the friar, and it's about the wedding. So he needs to find someone who will marry them, who is trusted, because they're enemies. Remember, their families hate each other, and so he has to find somebody that he can trust. So he has this friar who's like kind of like a priest sort of, and so he is going to be a new character, and so he wants to tell him his situation, and so the friar can help him with it. All right, that is the end of scene 2.